innovation. We do things as innovators without necessarily permission from anybody. And then sometimes we get noticed. And it's just a magical moment when everything comes together. And when I look back about voice on the net, today in the telecom world, if you're looking at market caps, I think the communications industry is worth over $2 trillion globally. Most of that has something to do with voice over IP in some way, shape, or form. And today, I think while the whole world's smitten with AI, the nice thing about AI for us is that voice is cool again. Somehow, voice came back. Maybe stronger than ever before. Maybe it's being rediscovered by generations which always never really paid attention to it, but it's really big. And I do believe that the birth of what I'll call the AI communication industry is going to be something which we never really expected. At least I didn't expect to see the opportunities again bigger than we ever had before. But the table stakes are bigger. I believe that no one can look back and say that AI is a fad. Though people will try. In fact, some people will deny it, but I don't believe realistically anyone could actually say it's a passing trend. And if you just look at how that's affecting how you live, how you work, what you do, how you think, how you communicate, it's changing. And I am super excited because for me, I've been waiting a really long time for something like this to be in front of us and to be in front of you, and for the chance for us to help define the future. Because that's what really today, tomorrow is all about. I've been hosting the vCon conferences. This is our third. I realized in Boston at our in September of 24 that this was going to be a thing. I had done a Vine Evolution event in Mountain View in the springtime, and I started realizing the power of vCons and where conversations really mattered, and it hit me. And so I've been all in on this. And I'd like to welcome everyone else who's all in on this also. I think we're driving the future. And every day I'm learning about new applications that are being created. But some people, don't quite get why vCons matter. It's okay. They do, and they'll be impactful. And some people will make a lot of money from it. But I think we can also change the world with it, which is what I really like. I'm really proud of some of the work that's already happening. One of our first speakers is using vCons for the public good in Kansas City. And I think that's just this tip of the iceberg of wonderful ways that conversations that become memory can change the world and really change our business models and start to understand and start to unravel the impact of AI in that. It's not just one or the other, it's the combination. And years ago, I spoke about purple minutes because back at Vine, I used to tease people about so many people went to soft switches. They gave up, or at least they said they did, right? They were going to voice over IP. But no one could really describe an application they were doing with voice over IP. It was simply replacing one for the other. So back in early 2000s, I said, okay, well, that's black. Those are black and white minutes. I want purple minutes. I want you to take what you're doing with voice over IP and start doing things never before practical or possible. I'm happy to say that now, 20 years later, we're living in that world. Most of the applications that people who were born into the internet take for granted are things that were never before practical or possible in the old telephone network. All purple. And I think that when we're looking at the confluence between AI and communications, it's going to be the second and third derivatives of the applications that get created that people say, oh my God, wow. Or maybe they won't say anything because it's their AI that's driving the thinking and they're saying, no, they're just passenger. Maybe that they lost the wheel. But I do think there's some great opportunities for each and every one of us to think about how these moving parts come together. I'm not here to sell you why vCons or format for conversations matter. That's up to you to figure out. I will tell you, though, that I am the Chief Evangelist Officer of the vCon Foundation. I'm grateful to those of you who have joined the vCon Foundation. And so it's a different kind of CEO role. But I have a chance to go around and to talk about applications, talk about what is, talk about what's possible. And I just believe that you're in front of something which there'll be no looking back from. And that when your conversations become memories that you can trust, and we're dealing in a world today where compliance matters more than ever before because there's enforcement. So you can be compliant with the GDPR in Europe. You can deal with the crazy AI regulations in the United States and other places. It's a framework where we can all prosper. And yes, there's definitely a land grab and a rush for all things AI first, but first and foremost, it's you as a person thinking about how you interact and how you think and what matters to you. And the nice part is that we're coming up with a way that we can start trusting things again. One of the unfortunate byproducts of the SIP revolution is that we introduced by accident the ability to spoof phone calls. I don't think anyone intentionally did that, but it happened. And as a result, we've kind of lost trust. I don't know how many people in the room today actually answer the phone when it rings if they don't recognize the number. Not too many. But if we're living in an end-to-end IP world where we could authenticate every endpoint, where we could actually have an ability to create some level of trust, maybe people would answer the phone again. Maybe, maybe not. Maybe it's gone forever. But there is a possibility. And anyway, in the future, your AI will answer the phone for you anyway. It won't be you. But even your AI will have to discriminate and discern whether it's worthwhile or not. Anyway, here at the conference, you're going to meet some voices that have never been to Vaughn before. If you've been to, I'm just curious by your show of hands, how many people have been to any of the conferences I've hosted in the last 30 years before? Welcome back. For those of you who didn't raise your hands, welcome to you too. This is a chance to build relationships. I'll just end on this. This is a different kind of event because one of the things that's going to happen for everyone who's speaking, or whether you're speaking, if you're in a breakout session this afternoon or tomorrow morning, before we break for lunch, every one of you who's speaking on a panel or speaking by yourself, you're going to be invited to come up here and give a 15-second pitch about your session. The reason is because when we have breakout sessions, people don't know where to go. And if you don't know where to go, I'm going to give the speakers the opportunity to sell their session. This is the only kind of pitching from the podium that I support. If you have products to sell, please do so outside the room. Selling here is sort of a sacred place, not to sell necessarily. Sell ideas, sell your passion, sell all that. But the product stuff is outside the room, too far. Because if it wasn't for the support of the sponsors we had, we wouldn't be able to do this event. So I'm very grateful for all that. The chance to get to know each other, because the reason why Vaughn is still around after 30 years is because of the community of people that grew up into it. And I don't have any way of saying thank you other than thank you. But with gratitude, I say that. I know all of you could be someplace else today. And for the fact that you're taking time out to be here with us, I'm very, very grateful for that. I've had things happen in my life in the last few years which made me really be grounded about not taking anything for granted. And so I just say thank you for being here and sharing your presence. And with that, I'd like to bring up my friend Chris Fine. I'm going to kick off our first session.
Thank you.
And if someone, by the way, knows how to set up the Mac so that the screen stays on, feel free to jump in and help out. Can you see that? Maybe not. Oh, that's bad mic. All right, use that mic. I'll go up.
If you turn that off, this is, oh yeah.
Yeah, bad mic. Use your mic.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here. I think I see a lot of familiar faces, but for those who haven't met me before, I'm Chris Fine. At this point in my life, I'm a consultant at large. I've been to many of Jeff's events over the years, always an honor to participate. And I feel like being up here, it's really a chance to get to ask Jeff a few questions, maybe contribute a little bit. I don't know, we'll just have to move the microphone back and forth,
Sure.
I guess. But my focus tends to be these days mostly in the workplace technology, and the future of work, which I found to be a fascinating topic, especially following the pandemic and the changes that have been made in the way people work and the effect of AI on work. My background before that was really in enterprise technology, both from the end user and the practitioner side, mostly in the financial services business, which is a very interesting sector to be in. Retired from that about 10 years ago, unretired, and started to do this. But our title this morning is Conversations as Assets. And that's a pretty fascinating phrase when you think about it. And I'm interested what you think about this, but um, when it seems obvious when you think back on it, the conversations always were assets, but they weren't trackable as assets. They weren't treated as assets in the enterprise. The means that enabled the conversations, the telecom systems, the networking technology, and everything else were treated as assets, and they were kept on the balance sheet and depreciated as assets and everything else. But conversations tended to be not an instantiated or solidified form that lent itself to being considered an asset. They were a medium, really. So I guess my thought for you, Jeff, is what do you think makes conversations into assets? Like, what do you see as the transitional thing or things that have morphed conversations into assets? Or do you just think they always have been and now we can keep track of them?
Well, I appreciate you leading the witness. And there's twofold to that, right? So those of you old enough to remember Lotus Notes, for example, and Domino, I do think that Ray Ozzie was onto something big when he attempted, really in the 90s, to start capturing corporate knowledge and create knowledge banks and to create wisdom, if you will, of the elders, or at least how companies dealt with their customers and dealt with information. But going back in time, yeah, I do think that conversations have always been sacred assets, in fact. And for any of you who've ever recently lost a loved one in the last, 15, 20 years, I promise that there's probably, if you could store your voicemail, you probably have a voicemail you'll never delete from that person or persons that means something to you. Because there's something emotionally connected to words that never can come back, at least until recently with AI. And it's that emotional intelligence that has great value. Now, I used to work at Cantor, so I can tell you that your voice, in fact, is your bond. And when you're on a trading floor, every conversation is recorded for a reason, so that I can't say I didn't do that trade. So in fact, for a long time, at least in the history of Wall Street, conversations are assets because billions of dollars, trillions of dollars every day are traded against it. So there's that part of it. But in terms of the everyday, every business, I think that's tremendous. And we're having a conversation just the other day about it's the conversations that happen very lightly that sometimes the most important conversations for business to hear. And those conversations that don't get recorded today are the missing conversations which can add value to someone's how to run an operation. I mean, I don't know if any of you who have in retail have ever walked into a restaurant, I don't know, I go to a bagel store, I like a certain type of bagel. And I literally 3 days ago asked for a bagel, they didn't have it, I walked out, and I was angry. But I realized that should have been vCon. Because if the owner of the bagel store knew that I wanted that bagel, then maybe the next time, they'll have it. Or more importantly, because I'll agree that we should maybe autonomize the customer. But the owner should know where the no came. And it's not just about bagels, it's about brands, it's about products, it's about anything and everything where we can start to capture informational conversational assets, which can change the way businesses run. And I think we should have always been doing it, but now we can.
Interesting. I mean, I think on the human side, I agree with you that they always have been assets. I think on the business side, though, like to take your example of trade recording.
Yeah.
I think that wasn't mined very much. That was used. I mean, if you have an asset, again, you invest in an asset and you want return on that asset, right? And I think a lot of conversations that were recorded, and that's across contact centers and trades and everything else, really weren't taken much advantage of, right? Or monetized.
Not at all, yeah.
Right. And so, but if you have technologies that enable something to be an asset, then you can get a return on that asset. And so if you think about why was that not true, even though zillions of voices were recorded and, unlimited, some huge number of hours, right, every year, I would argue was because it's actually for machines and for automated systems, it was kind of a difficult thing to do, right? Because it's very ambiguous, there's subtleties, right? And so the technologies that we had to track it and to get value out of it were not the same as, for example, a web transaction, right? So you think about the comparison there, where like in the early days of the internet, you thought of the pipes, and you thought of, the UI, and you thought of perhaps the transaction that you had a website do, like I ordered something, and that was the value of all of this. But then Google and everyone else figured out that there's huge value in the data itself, because they were able to structure it and manage it. And so, you'd argue, I guess, that if you are able to do that more with voice, you can apply machines to the difficult and kind of spongy task of understanding it and have it really work, then it becomes much more valuable, right?
Yeah, I mean, think of all of you as being landowners, and all of you actually own gold mines. But unless the price of gold and actually got to that price point where it's actually, you can cover the extraction cost now to take the money to mine the gold. Growing up, my dad was an investor in different real estate. He actually owned a gold mine once. And as a kid, it was really cool to see these little test tubes with gold nuggets in it. But when I asked my dad, when are we going to go to the gold mine, he said, no, never. And because never did the price of gold go above the cost to extract it. So it was a non-performing asset. And that's why I tell you today, most people's biggest non-performing assets is not necessarily recorded voices, but really your email. What if you could actually mine your email for gold and index it and have semantic search across all the knowledge that you personally have gathered over since you've had email? Connect that to other conversations you've had with people. It changes how you operate. It changes how you work. It changes how you live. And so every one of you and every one of your customers have potential gold mines. And Akana, you're right. It was really impossible to go through those tapes unless you had to with a court order, or otherwise you're being sued. You're not going to go through thousands of hours of recordings, but they did sometimes. I have a big elbows, and I accidentally may have done a trade or two from IT, literally on long bottom desk, but that was accidental. But the thing is, we all have these assets. And with AI and with the evolution of voice and conversations on the net, we have an opportunity to do something with it, where it's not just a memory, a sacred memory from a loved one, but they're business assets that we could start to leverage and start to mine as if it's your gold mine or titanium mine or diamond mine. And where we're able to now take it to the next level and be multidimensional in it. And it just blows my mind as far as the possibilities. But every one of you here have that opportunity to build these applications, leverage your own data, and prove to yourself how valuable this stuff really can be.
No, it's true. And so if that's the case, and you think about what technology enables it, right? There's an argument that says it's kind of two things. One is a technology that enables the mining, right? Enables the complete parsing and categorization of the data in the asset, right? And that's AI. And then there's some way to structure it, right? And that's potentially vCons, right? Because you can waste a lot of time, whether you're a person or a computer, trying to just put all the various odds and ends of a conversation together and store it in a unified, standardized structure. And then even if you create a structure, it's a proprietary structure. So then what do you do when you want to combine two different sources? So imagine if you had an IETF standard or all of the open source accompaniment to that, to be able to treat this kind of slippery and spongy data as something much more solid and standardized. And so I think if you have that plus the processing capability, then it really becomes an asset. Do you agree?
I do. And in fact, the idea of having a standard way to capture conversations, join them, connect them, bridge them, properly do provenance on the information, and where needed, provide compliance. All that is wonderful stuff. And it's the very beginning of a new market, which is why I was calling this the AI communication industry, because this is stuff which we had to deal with compliance in the past, but the tooling necessarily wasn't there yet. And the other subtle benefit of using something like vCons, which are understood by the LLMs, is we get to enter the world of unstructured data. And one of the cool nuances about all this is if you could actually put structure around unstructured data, you could do much more than just capture conversations. And that's where my mind starts to go, because then it becomes multidimensional in what you're putting a wrapper around. and having that structure for it. And that's where one of the hidden values of vCons come from, is providing structure when there is no structure.
Yeah, yeah. Now, who do you think, we were talking about this at breakfast, so in the limited time we have left, an interesting question. So to paraphrase, one company I've done a lot of work for is HPE Networking, and one of the things that they always talk about is networking for AI and AI for networking, and they're two sides of a coin, right? So AI for networking means smarter networks, and networking for AI means you build stuff for these giant AI processing centers. But what if you said AI for voice versus voice for AI, right? And like, if you think about it that way, then if voice is valuable to AI, then the giant AI and growing AI industry is going to help finance some of this, right? I mean, to invest in it, to be able to get better input to their systems from voice.
Right. I mean, you pointed out, I think it was Anthropic, they put a high beta on providing prompts via voice prompts versus text prompts. And it makes total sense to me, because people are able to communicate differently when they're speaking than when they're typing. And that just goes to our brains and how we're communicating there. And I do think that that's one of the reasons why voice is back. It's not from the proliferation of voice APIs necessarily, or not because of it, but it's because all of a sudden people are listening again, talking again, and engaging again, and it's cool. And we have to be careful. I can tell you, running the VCon events over the years I did, VoIP was cool and not cool, and cool and not cool. And if you're doing a startup, it's fun to raise money when it's something that's cool, and when it's not cool, it's not so fun easy to raise a startup. And typically, you need to raise the money when things are not cool, but enjoy it now while it is cool. And it's because there will be fads that come and go. Look, in the year 2000, when the dot-com crash happened, VCon had its biggest year ever. And the only way I can account for that is that we were sitting at that intersection of the internet and communications. We were neither just internet or communications. We were at that edge. So the dot-com crash affected friends of mine, but it did not affect what we did. And I think that if there is going to be a bubble burst on AI at some level someday, maybe, if you're going to be doing work in this field of creating value from conversations, that itself is not going to necessarily be affected adversely by a bubble crash on AI. If anything, you guys are also living the benefit of Moore's law, if it still applies. I mean, if you just think about how much cheaper it is to use ChatGPT today than it was, how many tokens you need less now than you did a few years ago. I mean, we get to overload our minds with all these extra things we want to do, but it's getting cheaper, faster, quicker, and unfortunately, when the AI thinks faster than you, what do you do?
I don't know. I see it every day. But I guess just to I don't know if this is the ending thought or not, but what's wrong with this picture? Like, what, if anything, do we need to think about? The number one for me is really privacy and security, right? Like, where's the framework of understanding where rights are? I mean, on one hand, you can argue that it's just another kind of data, and whatever meager protections we have on data apply to voice as well. But there's a long tradition of going back to the world of the telephone, where voice was regulated kind of differently from data. And so how do we reconcile that? Is that the thing that you're concerned about? Or, I mean, that's probably my number one, but what do you think?
I think there are many layers to that answer. I would eat up everyone's time if I actually answered that the way it could or would, but I'll just say this, that we have to beware. It's be aware and beware of not the possibilities, but the fear, greed, and disruption that certain regulators are going to feel from not understanding what we're talking about. And this is where we've got to be really careful that the guardrails that are out there don't exist necessarily on the AI side right now on a federal level in the US. It does exist in certain countries. We have to be compliant. We have to make sure that the tools we're building comply to the laws of the land. But as far as what concerns me is age. Bringing next generation folks into the marketplace who can take what work that we've been doing and bring it forward. Because there's a tremendous opportunity here for new blood to come into the market, new people, new dreams to be had. And I think that we want to be curating and opening the doors for possibilities for great things to happen for everybody, to be as inclusive as possible. we're living at back in the days of the dial-up internet, I remember distinctly saying that one day the internet would be on broadband so pervasive that billions of people all over the world, if they have internet connectivity, they can contribute to something. I think that time is coming. And so to answer your question, yeah, we have to be aware of the laws, the compliance, and what pops up. I mean, that's why here at the conferences, by the way, you always will find regulatory policy sessions. I'm very happy that today Glenn Richards is, we're doing telecom policy today, and tomorrow we're going to do AI policy. Because working in the dark blindsides you. And so I take great pride in being aware of policy work. And I think from a technology perspective, we have an opportunity to build things, which, might be boring to do compliance, but let me tell you, if you could save your company billions of dollars in fines, you might want to pay attention to that. Chris, thank you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Jeff. Thank you.
Any idea how to fix that? Oh, 1 second. Oh, I see. I didn't know that part.
Yeah.
It's okay. It's blanks it anyway. There you go. All right. Anyway, just technical issues. I'm sorry about that. By the way, don't be shy. If you hear stuff, one other thing I'll just put out there, and this is certainly when I'm talking, I don't want to be disrespectful to any of our speakers, but if you hear something that I say that you don't agree with, call bullshit on me, it's totally fine. You have my permission to be interrupt driven. If something that is said is in a term that's not understood, that you need a translator for, please ask for a translation, because there's a lot of terminology which I hear, which I will interrupt people sometimes and ask. So please feel comfortable. I know there's a balance between being polite and impolite, but respectfully, if something sounds like bullshit, call bullshit, it's okay. Because I do try to keep it real, and at the same time be open to dreams and what's possible. And Jill, I'd like to bring Jill up forward. Come on, welcome, Jill. Please a round of. Thank you. Thank you, Tom. Move over. All right. Well, my computer's still on a. What? It's oh, fine. It's one of these screens. Maybe disconnect again. I'm sorry, Jill. 1 second. It was right over here. Well, I don't even see it anymore. It was over here. This is, I'm putting too much. Yeah, at that one. Yeah, this is just all. Yeah. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
All right. One of the first things that comes to, whenever I'm briefing people about vCons, the first thing people ask me about almost always is, where's their money? Or more importantly, what kind of applications are out there today that are doing something with vCons? And I'm very proud of the work that Jill has done, because she's actually pioneering the use of vCons in the public sector for the public good. And if anyone, please give her a round of applause, please, for the work that she is doing.
Thank you.
Now, could you please explain what this is?
So my name is Jill, and I own a BPO call center, and I also own a company where we resell CCaaS, NICE, Five9, Zoom, and we just signed with Connects AI. And about a year ago, when I met Jeff, I had this idea, because we do a lot of work with the 211 United Way communities. Does anyone not know what 211 is?
What is 211?
Okay. 211, it started back in 1998 in Georgia to have a, when you dial 911 for an emergency, well, 211 is called after that when you need resources in housing, food, shelter, like, if you're in a state that you need support, mental health, things like that, you can dial 211, and that connects you with a local resource or a local representative that can give you resources of where to go. So it's evolved over the years, and now United Way is very, very involved in the 211 organizations. We do answer a lot of those calls, and so I had an idea, like these agents that answer the calls today, they take the call, they're toggling around to find the resource for the caller. It's usually a pretty sensitive situation, right? Somebody's distressed, somebody's dealing with a situation that they need help with. And so the agent then finds the resource. They're also trying to take notes because they're going to have to create an after call work state. And so it's a pretty high stress call. And then they hang up the call and they click a disposition. Let's say in this case, it was housing, a housing issue. And then they take some notes and then they're on to the next call. So what was happening, I felt, was not only were the agents getting really stressed out, but couldn't we take those conversations and do something with them so that we can relieve some of that stress? And Jeff said, yes, we can. And so I did, and we've got Rick and Chris here from vCon work together to create a pilot. And part of the pilot was to, again, take those transcriptions from NICE, because the 211 organizations, a lot of them use NICE as a platform. And we were able to take those recordings of the call and put them into a conserver, because part of working with the public sector is that privacy, is the security. You know, if they take that very seriously. And so the ability to redact information wasn't possible, you know, today. So that had to be included. And then we were also able, again, to take 100% of the conversations. So in contact centers today, generally, recordings of calls are only listened to by a quality assurance team. And if you're lucky, they get to about 10% of those calls. They're generally listened to on the premise of how did the agent do? Not what was the customer saying, but how did the agent, did they answer the phone call correctly? Did they follow the process of helping the customer? Not what the customer was actually saying or dealing with. So as this began to evolve, we recognized again how valuable 100% of that conversation is. We were missing out on so many things. So let me just tell you, when it comes to housing, really the issue was evictions. And it wasn't just evictions, it was actually having legal aid to support the people getting evicted. None of that was ever determined or established previously in listening to phone calls. And I would say the other thing that really made quite a big impact over this past year working with them was the ability to extract information that they were looking for. So for example, Kansas City deals with a lot of weather, cold weather in the winter. And so shelter is a big part of their resource distribution. And so there had been a new agent on handling a call. There was, you know, a baby involved and a single mom who needed shelter. All the resources were full. That call was actually able to be escalated up and handled in a way that probably would have gotten lost in the mix or found a couple of days later if somebody found it during a queue. You know, it's like so much data was just being lost and not utilized in a way to be helpful. So yeah, long story short.
No, but just lead with that, because I think you're setting a scenario which people are not, first of all, not aware of, but having known what you went through to get there, if there are people in the room thinking about building applications, maybe not for 211, but for other things, what have you learned about this process? And do you see other cities around the United States wanting to pilot this if they could?
So the value that I see is that data is gold. And right now, telecom owns that first point of entry into conversations. What's happened is telecom's just passed it along. They said, we understand that we're important. We provide that connectivity. You deal with the conversations, you deal with the privacy, you deal with all of that. And I think at this point, now's the time that telco actually owns that first point, starts addressing what that looks like. You don't need to pass it along. You don't need to be dependent on platforms that right now, I think what I'm seeing, obviously enterprise level, you need a lot of bells and whistles, but really for SMB to mid-market, you don't need all the things that are being offered today. And that can be started, I think, at the telco level.
And would I guess, have you had any requests from other cities to pilot, or how do other cities, if there were people here connected to municipalities, how would they learn about this?
Well, I'm going around and kind of working. We just signed the state of Virginia.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah.
Wow. So this is happening. This is good.
Yeah.
And so, but I like your point about the extraction side. So the fact that the telcos were owning that data, or at least not giving you access to it, and now you have your own gold mines. And it sounds like that's a place where people who are in need can be serviced. And I do think the 100% versus 10%, that ratio matters too, as far as access to the information.
So I learned last week, we have a customer that is moving from NICE to 5.9. They have to keep their recordings for 7 years. Do you see where this is going?
Yeah.
Yeah, they can't move those recordings. They will have to keep licenses on NICE for the next 7 years to have access to listen to those recordings.
Wow.
That should never happen again.
Wow. Yes. All right. Any questions for Jill? Come on. Yes, Claude.
When you go to Virginia, what do you have to bring to the table to pick up the customer?
Yeah, so when I'm working with the public sector, I'm really looking at what problems are they trying to solve. In the state of Virginia, they were very inspired by the pilot that we did with Kansas City. I think what's important to these organizations is the ability to have access to 100% of those conversations. And then they can use them in multiple different ways, whether it be funding, whether it be, again, agent performance, but really that customer journey and what's actually happening. Yeah.
1 second. So to follow up though, so like, and I don't want to, I'm not political and I really don't want to do politics, but I'm just curious, in whether it's Kansas City or in Virginia, is anyone like in the office curious about how they could better serve their people? And do they look at these vCon, these recordings as a way to do better service?
Yes. And they're also inspired to start modernizing their technology. So there's actually funds that are now being offered to be able to use AI. But again, they have no intention of replacing their human workforce. I mean, none whatsoever. If anything, they're like very much, no. But they can use AI in these ways that will actually enable their workforce to be able to help more specifically what customers are looking for, and also solving problems. Again, are we looking for, do we need more housing or do we need more legal aid for evictions, right?
So for people in the room that are hesitant about vCons or about the whole idea of portable conversations, whether they're standard or not standard, what would be your advice to them about the value that you've seen or value that they could find?
Just start, I would say just start being curious and start from start from what you know. And if what you know is that connectivity piece, how can it start growing? How can that ownership change? I mean, who does own that? Me as a consumer, do I own 50% of that conversation? Who's protecting me?
Right, and that's a whole other challenge, right?
Well, because I had this kind of idea. Remember back, 20 years ago, LifeLock came about because people's identities were getting stolen.
Yeah.
Like, I think something like that could be developed for this. Like, I want to know who's got a recording of my conversations. I don't care if it was with the plumber or if it was with my doctor or if it was with my best friend. Like, those are all very different conversations. And I want to know what's out there.
Well, I mean, it might surprise you, but allegedly in the state of California, as a digital citizen, you have lots of rights. You have the right, I believe, to remove consent. You have the right to find out who's recorded you. You should have, I believe you have the right to request for recordings to be deleted. You have the right to have, if your voice was used to do AI modeling, for it to be removed. But I am not aware of anyone yet that's actually honoring those digital rights.
Well, and we got sued once because we didn't put the recording for quality purposes. This call may be monitored or recorded. We put it after the caller could press 1 to get up, like, seriously. And people go look for that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, but I guess from a forward-looking perspective, just one last question. Are you happy you've gone down the vCon rabbit hole?
Oh, yeah.
No, continue. No, you don't always short. It doesn't have to be yes.
It's just, to me, it's just starting. Like, there's just so many things that can be done and will be done. We're just starting.
And I think that's the point, that we really are. The vCon standard, I think the work started in 2022, I guess. And sometime later this year, maybe the RFC comes out, which would be nice, but we are just starting. And if vCons were just vCons and AI and ChatGPT wasn't released in November 22 or 23, it would have 22. It would have changed. Everything would have changed. But we can't go back, right?
Well, and this is where the smart cities start coming.
Yeah.
And this is really where those communities, they do need to capture and track data differently. Like, it's almost like, what are we calling? Our QA team is now data intelligence analysts. So, I mean, that's how even those roles are changing of what we expect them to do and need them to do, completely changing. Their titles are changing. Their skill sets are changing. We're coaching them. We're all kind of learning together, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of like when you look at AI in that perspective, the term smart cities maybe weren't always so smart.
Right.
But I do think we have a chance in a digital city that wants to modernize, to at least a city that wants to modernize, to look at their all these lifeline services,
right,
and start adding value.
Well, like even Virginia, they're including Salvation Army. They're including, like, it's for all their state resources.
And by the way, this is not an easy task. If you've ever dealt with city governments, it's the sales cycle on this stuff is like 18 months, 2 years. It's not a quick sale, but it's nice to know there are people out there that are doing things for the public good. And Jill, thank you so much for the work that you continue to do. Thank you.
Much, yeah.
I'd like to invite, the two of you to come on forward, please. Come on down. So, yeah, I'm just really proud of the work Jill's doing. I'm just excited to find vCons for public good is like a good thing for all of us. I need to give you the mic though for recording. We both do it? Yeah, there's both of you have those are small mics. There's a big mic.
Hi, Doug.
Glenn, take it away.
Good to see you. Great. So we just share this mic? Is that what we do? Okay. Hi, I'm Glenn Richards. I'm with Dickinson Wright. Hopefully know a number of folks in the room. I'm here to talk about regulatory matters. Don't leave. So, and this is Tyler. Tyler's going to introduce himself. I've met Tyler this morning. And the way we've decided to divide up the panel, because of the age disparity, I'm going to talk about technologies developed before 2005, and Tyler's going to address everything else. So I've got payphones, VoIP, and internet porn, and Tyler's going to deal with the rest. So just to get started, I'm going to deal sort of more with FCC matters. Tyler's going to talk about AI and privacy issues. Great segue from the conversation with Jill. But a lot going on at the FCC. And despite the hope, I think, that some of us may have had with the incoming administration, and you guys may have heard the delete, and we thought it was going to be less regulation and, you know, more free market, more let the markets decide who wins and who loses. I would argue that a year and a half in, at least in the voice sector, because of the overwhelming concerns that continue around robocalling, robotexting, and fraud, that my clients are actually regulated more than they ever were than before this administration. And there's a handful of rulemakings that are going to be even talked about at the commission this week that are ongoing, that would impose even more regulations on the industries that deal in voice and texting. And including one that Jill may or may not have heard about, the onshoring of the call centers. So I'm going to just go through these pretty quickly. We're going to we've got 30 minutes. We're going to try to talk about 10 minutes each, then open the floor for questions. But I've got just a few topics. First one I want to talk about is the IP transition. For those of you that have been in the voice side of the industry for years, they've been talking about a transition away from traditional TDM networks to IP networks. It's been at least 15 years. The first transition was supposed to end in 2018. They're now contemplating, forcing the carriers to get rid of old technology by 2028. There are a handful of proceedings that are looking at this, but not surprisingly, the incumbents and others have weighed in saying, you know what, maybe that's a bit too soon. Issues that are being raised are, who's going to pay for this? Obviously, this industry loves the largesse of somebody else paying for their technology. So who's going to pay for it is a big question. The other major issue that's come up of late is a lot of the 911 call centers are not all IP enabled. And so concerns are, as they do away with connectivity to those call centers, that there could be lapses in call taking. And obviously nothing will happen if we can't make 911 calls. So when and if the IP transition happens remains to be seen. But and now the latest conversation is, again, we're getting into age-old conversations around intercarrier compensation. There's a concept called bill and keep, which has to do with call terminators getting paid for terminating calls from call originators. There are still remnants of these sort of archaic intercarrier compensation regimes. And so the FCC is now looking at a more holistic, doing away with that and moving it all to traditional bill and keep, which means that nobody gets compensated when they terminate traffic for other service providers. So that's the IP transition. Robocall issues, again, dominating conversations are at the FCC. One of the big issues has to do is everyone in this room is probably familiar with Stir Shaken, which basically attempts to authenticate a phone number that gets to you. Now there's another proceeding that they're looking at trying to question whether they should authenticate the identity of the caller. So right now, if you're familiar with Stir Shaken, you can get an attestation of an A attestation, means this call was originated by and signed by someone who gave the phone number to that customer, and it is their phone number. You can feel more comfortable potentially answering that call. The problem is that the name that comes through with that is not always authenticated. So now the second phase of this process is the FCC is looking at whether to require the passing of authenticated names through what's called rich call data in the call flow, so that if Tyler calls me or Tyler calls from his firm from Womble, that when that call gets to me, I not only see an authenticated phone number, but I see a Womble logo, and so I can feel even more comfortable answering that call. Issues that have been raised around these proposals include, how much is this going to cost? A lot of the smaller VoIP providers and carriers are worried that the larger carriers are going to attempt to impose proprietary standards on the delivery of authenticated caller ID. The other concern is that what we're seeing is that the carriers are using the flexibility that they have been granted by the FCC to deal with robocalling. They're using analytics now to block traffic, which would otherwise deem to be illegal, not to be illegal or unlawful. They're also mislabeling phone calls as spam, and smaller carriers don't have a redress opportunity. So you're selling services to small car dealerships or dentists, and they're sending text messages or making phone calls to their customers, and they're coming in not only with a spam likely, but the carriers are also stripping out the caller name and address or the name and identity. So if I am Glenn's dealership calling Tyler, Tyler sees Gaithersburg, Maryland, spam likely from my calls. There is no redress on that activity, so causing a lot of frustration. The alternative that's being offered to the smaller carriers is to actually pay these analytics companies to take off those labels. It's basically, we're analyzing your calls, we're finding there's a problem, and the one way that you could get around that is you pay us for our services. Again, problematic for lots of reasons. Just a couple of more quick mentions, and then I'll let Tyler kind of cover his issues. The onshoring call center NPRM, which is going to be on the FCC's agenda on Thursday, just really took industry by surprise. Basically, what the chairman is proposing, and that this will likely be adopted for comment on Thursday, is the claim is that customers are getting frustrated by offshore call centers because of language difficulties. There's also concerns that data, private sensitive data may be accessed by folks that are overseas. And the FCC is proposing that for entities that it regulates, such as VoIP providers, telecom providers, cable companies, that if they are going to have offshore call centers, that they then notify folks when they call those call centers that they're being serviced by an offshore call center, that the customer then has the right to ask that it's called, get transferred to a US-based call center, and then that those offshore call centers not be allowed to handle any sensitive customer data. This would be an enormous sea change in the call center business. As I understand it, a lot of the offshore call centers are used to support overnight hours because, obviously you don't want people in the US don't want to be working from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. The other concern is that if the FCC imposes this obligation, it may, companies may just say, we're not going to support overnight call hours because we don't want to have to worry about these transfers back. The other concerns are, how to define sensitive information. They're also going to require English proficiency at these offshore call centers. So I'm seeing a huge backlash potentially from the Chamber of Commerce and others when this gets released. The likelihood is that the actual notice will come out Friday. It will get published in the Federal Register, and comments will be accepted from industry and others within about 30 days. But this is just a huge issue, I think, for industry, and a lot of my clients are sort of aghast that the FCC has even proposed this. So just wrapping up real quickly, state regulation continues to be kind of a concern for at least on the voice side. The California PUC issued a decision for the first time licensing or requiring registration of voice over IP providers. We thought we had sort of gotten past this 22 years ago, but because of the FCC, not being more proactive in restating its preemption of state regulation of VoIP, the states are now looking for sort of niches in that regulatory framework to say, well, you didn't regulate service quality, so we're going to regulate service quality. So California put out this decision. The US Telecom, who represents the largest carriers, appealed to in California, and they actually lost that case. There is a preemption petition at the FCC asking for the FCC to sort of reiterate its preemption of voice services, but it has been pending or sitting there for 13 months. The FCC has not taken a position on that petition. And in the meantime, we have about a half a dozen states that are now proposing legislation that would impose, proposing legislation that would impose service quality obligations on VoIP providers. The VCon coalition that Jeff founded and I continue to represent is opposing that legislation, but we are feeling the headwinds on potentially having a new round of state regulation on the voice side. So with that, I'll hand the mic over to Tyler.
The FCC is keeping everyone busy.
Thank goodness.
My name is Tyler Brightigan. I started my legal career at the FCC. I'm currently a partner at the international law firm Womble Bond Dickinson. I came back to the private sector about 6 months ago and was serving as the Director of Privacy and Tech Enforcement for the Texas Attorney General's office here. The FCC is, I would say Chair Carr is using a heavy stick where he can. I used to be a legal advisor for Commissioner Symington, who him and Carr, despite being politically aligned, tend to butt heads on policy. But the FCC has also been using its covered list pretty intensely. Your comment on sort of the onshoring of call centers, I think the alternative risk would be that the FCC felt the need to add certain foreign-owned call centers to a covered list. It's a heavy stick that a lot of companies have had trouble getting around. They just added, or they're about to start adding routers to the covered list they announced at the end of last week. Anyways.
And the covered list is maybe just.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
The covered list is basically if your company is added to it, and it's under sort of, I don't want to say pretextual, but an opaque national security determination that will cite things like we're hosting FIFA in the US, so drones are dangerous. And they'll use that to justify adding a company to the covered list, and you from there are no longer allowed to manufacture and sell your products into the United States. So it's been largely targeted on entities that have ultimate Chinese ownership, but I think the way they have expanded it beyond, I would say, like traditional telecom products, now getting into drones, routers, I think more traditional, but it's just a method that they are using to knock out basically services.
So it's in the tradition of words not meaning what they mean, covered means ban.
Yes. The FCC using opaque language, yes. So I focus on a lot of some FCC issues, but a lot of consumer protection, privacy matters. I'm just going to run over some of sort of like the high risk areas that are sort of popping up around the United States, both at the federal and state level. I think TCPA, continues to be sort of the Chamber of Commerce is doing its best to beat TCPA reform into the minds of both federal and state legislatures. It seems to not be working particularly well. Here in Texas, last session, Texas is bicameral legislature, so only every other year do they meet, but passed mini TCPA here in Texas that the accusation was that it appeared drafted by the plaintiff's bar. It added several new private rights of action to it. And so Texas is already the third heaviest TCPA litigation state. And so only now that they can pair, essentially, plaintiffs can pair the federal TCPA with Texas's version, adding, I think we'll continue to see increased litigation in Texas, California and Florida being the other two jurisdictions with the highest. Takeaway from that, if you have a lot of consumers or a lot of business in any of those three jurisdictions, double check those states' mini TCPA laws and pay attention to TCPA compliance in that regard. Privacy and cybersecurity laws have been getting a pretty good look at both the federal and state levels. We're now at 21 states have enacted their own version of a comprehensive privacy law. So that would mean, not sector specific. So it's applying to, any interaction that a company is having with consumers with, some carve outs, if TCPA should govern or FCRA, HIPAA, those would still control, but otherwise these comprehensive privacy laws are sort of filling that gap. Oklahoma just passed, my home state is Oklahoma. I live in Houston right now though, but they just passed, they became the 21st state to pass a comprehensive privacy law. So there's been a big bipartisan push on that front. All of these laws so far, for the most part, do not have a private right of action. But, going back to, they're consistent with the TCPA in sort of the general notice disclosure regimes. So, under all of these laws, you can sort of boil down the requirements to be making sure you're providing adequate notice to consumers and obtaining appropriate consents when needed. Yeah.
Tyler,
So that would mean like like I could sue you if I felt your company violated one of these laws, as opposed to only the government can investigate or use these laws to go after someone. Only if the government's useless. No, so the state AGs of every state have enforcement authority. I would say California, Texas, what other states have been pretty active? Virginia, those are pretty active states in the enforcement context. They have big AG's offices with a lot of resources. Most of these laws are still pretty new. In my role in Texas was setting up how Texas would approach how it would enforce compliance with these laws. But for the most part, the risk is relatively low, I would say, with the exception of California, which is taking an audit approach to a lot of companies. So they're, instead of just looking at like a couple practices, they're looking, did you comply with one through whatever requirements of their laws? So, the takeaway from that is avoid consumer complaints in California. If you have a large base in California, make sure your practices, at least externally facing, which is what regulators will look at first, are compliant with California's privacy law. And then also on the back end, if you get under all these laws, consumers can, request to have their data deleted, or they can request copies of all the data that you have on them. Making sure you have those requirements operationalized, I think, is really important to avoid scrutiny, particularly in California. I think one other really hot area in both federal and state levels, any company that's interacting with children or minors under the age of 18, I think there's a ton of scrutiny on a bipartisan basis. At the federal level, there were 19 bills introduced on both the House and Senate side at the end of last year. They are on a bipartisan basis determined to get those across the finish line. One of those laws addresses AI chatbots and the use that practice with interacting with minors. So that's something to keep an eye out for. But they're shooting for May to get a vote on those bills. So that's just something to watch out for. And they're cutting a lot of deals because both parties want those laws passed. So how your website is interacting with users that might be under the age of 18, something to keep an eye out for throughout the rest of this year. If you're knowingly collecting data from children, or children or minors are actively using your platform, make sure those practices both comply with existing federal law, which would be the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, COPPA. But then now there are a bunch of new state laws that are coming online that are partially what's pushing the federal government to pass new laws. So here in Texas, if anyone has an app, if your company maintains an app, there's a new law called the Texas App Store Accountability Act. Louisiana, Alabama, Utah, and California have all passed similar versions of it. Texas's was enjoined at the very end of last year. It's been appealed to the Fifth Circuit. That does contain an arguable private right of action. So if you're providing an app to consumers and it violates one of the requirements, Texas is enjoined though right now, so no risk, but it's on appeal at the Fifth Circuit. Utah's comes into effect in a couple months, which also has a private right of action. So that's something to look out for if you have a lot of Utah consumers that might be under the age of 18. Just making sure you're at least have some level of compliance with the law to deter threatened legal action. That's always the takeaway. But I think those are probably the biggest risks. Yeah.
Question, I don't want to out myself as a non-technology person, but I read an article on the internet, hopefully it's legit, that it was a police station which utilizing AI to type up pay stubs, and inside of that police report, they turned the suspects into a frog because they were watching on TV The Princess and the Frog. is that like user error, or is that something that will take AI, like, how would we make sure something like that doesn't happen? That it's truly close to everyone.
AI hallucinating a fraud. I saw that they were using, that the police department was using this AI to generate their police reports. I didn't see the frog aspect, which does make that more noteworthy. I think we're still the Federal Trade Commission in particular, under this administration, has generally said that they'll be hands off with AI regulation, but the one area that they caveat that with is under sort of traditional deceptive practices. And so, there's a lot of, I think, questions on the accuracy of AI at times, and what those AI vendors, what representations they're making to their potential business partners and or consumers. And so, I think that underscores there should always be a human in the loop or some sort of audit process. What an AI audit ultimately looks like, I think it's still, there's only a few companies that are doing AI, that offer like AI audits, and what sort of best practices in that field looks like, still largely unsettled. But I think in general, there should always be some sort of human element right now, because if you look at like all the lawyers that have gotten in trouble with citing fake cases to courts. In Westlaw and LexisNexis, who are the two biggest legal databases, their own AIs have that same issue still, which is wild because they're only trained on real cases. So until, and I don't know if this problem will ever be solved, but I think best practices for now, there should always be a human in the loop, meaning a human reviewing the outputs of the AI before documents, particularly documents that have potential severe consequences, that it's being reviewed still by a human.
Yeah, I think if you kissed the frog, it turned into the actual suspect. So that was fine. Another question.
There was an initiative to mark foreign originated calls, even to create a certain FBA for them. So is there any news on that?
No, I mean, it's still under consideration. It's part of one of the pending rulemakings. And this offshore call center is part of this initiative, with the idea that the perception, whether real or not, is that a lot of the bad actors are located overseas. US authorities have limited jurisdiction and ability to actually shut down these call centers, which allegedly are, legitimate call centers during the day, and at night they're, trying to rip off US customers, the next day. So the FCC has got, I think industry is concerned about these proposals. They're going to be difficult to implement. Another one that I should have mentioned in the earlier comments is one of the new proposals would actually ban secondary resale of telephone numbers. So right now, only certain entities in the US have direct access to phone numbers. Competitive carriers, VoIP providers. A lot of the VoIP community gets their phone numbers from somebody like a Bandwidth, and then they resell to others. And there's a chain of resale. The FCC is of the mind that those secondary, third-dairy, fourth-dairy resales are problematic, and they are proposing actually to ban the resale of numbers beyond the first step, which again, I think would be incredibly disruptive generally to industry. The other thing I want to mention real quickly is, Tyler mentioned the TCPA, the Telephone Consumer Protection Act. We didn't talk about the telemarketing sales rule, which is another one. But the courts have actually been a bit favorable towards the defendants. They've raised questions as to whether text messages are really covered by the TCPA. They are now raising questions whether written consent can be required. So, the act for the most part was written in 91, before a lot of the new technologies. You're talking about the initiative on COPPA. I'm really curious to see whether there's going to be some groundswell because of all the disparity in court decisions, whether Congress is going to have to revise the TCPA and the TSR to make it clearer that it applies to broader contexts and communications at some point. So just the thought, because, again, if you're calling someone or texting someone, you got to know where they are. You got to know what the rules are about consent. And frankly, the default, you do more of this, it has to be you need to have someone's consent to call or text them.
Mhm.
Yes, there are qualifications on political, on charitable, on other things, but if you're going to call someone, you're going to text someone, and you don't have consent, you could get in trouble.
Yeah, I think courts have now, both the Fifth Circuit and I just saw a Maryland judge on Friday ruled, federal judge as well, that they're sort of gutting the prior express written consent, which is what the FCC's position has been, that it had to be written. So they're saying, well, courts are now questioning whether or not that it actually has to be written, and whether verbal consent, it passes TCPA muster. That's it. Fifth Circuit, Maryland seem to be siding with that. I don't know that will deter a plaintiff's attorney from threatening you or proceeding with litigation. So something just to be mindful of the contrast there. I think to add a little sort of a comparative analysis on the offshoring aspect, I do a lot of defense contractor work, cybersecurity work for them, which they're subject to very rigorous requirements. They are allowed to have offshore call centers, service help. Obviously those offshore folks cannot access classified or lower classifications of data, but they are still allowed to use all of Indian call centers, foreign call centers. So it's kind of fascinating that the FCC is taking a.
So I think Jeff's about to play the get off the stage music. Tyler and I are going to be around today if anybody has questions. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Lauren, for having us, and look forward to catching up with everyone. Bye-bye. Well done, Tyler.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
That was great. Thank you. I sped it up because I know that's the questions I had. This is for you.
So this is a great pride moment. Vonage recently celebrated its 25th anniversary. And this is the first time, I believe, in the history of Vonage event that we had someone from Vonage speak, other than me. So I'm very happy that Oscar was able to be here today and join us.
Yeah, that's my take that. But
Here?
Set it up yet. Okay. Let's connect this real quick. I'll just finish
Sure.
screens here. Here, right here. Okay. There you go.
All right, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining. I'm Oscar Rodriguez. I am Senior Director of Global Partner Solutions at Vonage. And today I want to talk about the rise of AI-powered voice communications, particularly in finance. And what we're hearing a lot about AI right now, but voice is where things get especially interesting because voice is still one of the most immediate and natural ways people interact. We've been doing that all year. We all came here because we wanted to hear somebody speak. And in financial services, where trust, speed, clarity matter, that makes voice a very important channel. So over the next few minutes, I want to walk through why voice continues to matter, why AI is accelerating its value, and what use cases are emerging in finance, and how new technologies like Amazon Nova Sonic and Vonage help make these experiences possible. So one thing I think is important to remember is that, oh, I might be stepping on these.
There you go. Okay. Back for a second. Your screens have their own, there you go.
Actually, let me make this full screen real quick. There we go. All right, so one thing I think is important to remember is that every time a new communication wave arrives, people assume voice is going to become less relevant. But what actually happens is that voice just keeps reinventing itself. We saw that in the fixed telephony era, where voice was the foundation of global communication. Then in the mobile and VoIP era, voice became more personal, portable, and integrated into apps and digital services. So then came voice assistants and basic bots, which introduced automation, but often felt very narrow and command-based experiences. So now we are in a new phase, what I'd like to call the AI agent renaissance for voice. Instead of short command and response interactions, we are moving forward with multi-turn conversations with context, memory, reasoning, action taking, and that is a very different experience. And that matters because voice still has some advantage that newer channels do not replace very well. It is fast, it carries nuance, and it fits situations where typing is inconvenient or where a human-like experience and interaction matters more. In a recently released AI voice report, the CPAS AA cites contact center research showing that voice still represents 63% of contacts mix, including 49% inbound and 14% outbound. So this is not about replacing voice, it's about modernizing one of the most important channels enterprises already rely on. So why is this accelerating now, especially in financial services? So the first driver is better client experiences. Voice AI makes interactions faster, more personalized, and more available. It can operate 24/7, remember context, and increasingly respond in ways that feel more emotionally intelligent, not just based on the words being said, but on tone, urgency, hesitation, and frustration as well. So that matters in finance because customers are often calling in moments that carry some urgency or stress. It might be a question about fraud, an account issue, a payment problem, or a policy update. In those moments, a fast, clear conversational experience matters a lot. Now, the second driver is operational efficiency. A lot of routine financial interactions are still important, but repetitive. Balancing queries, payment reminders, onboarding steps, support questions, transaction status, all of that, AI voice helps automate those at scale, improves responsiveness, and free up human agents to focus on higher value or more sensitive interactions. Now, the third driver is security and compliance. In regulated industries like finance, that technology has to be trusted. That includes things like voice biometrics, fraud detection, secure authentication, monitoring, policy controls, and governance over how interactions are handled. And finally, the feature, voice AI is becoming more proactive, more multilingual. I'll show that in a demo that I have coming up. More integrated across systems and more capable of turning conversations into actions. The key point is that the next generation of voice agents has to do more than sound conversational. It has to solve a business problem securely, accurately, and at scale. So let's talk about some real use cases. In banking and financial services, voice AI can improve customer support, automate parts of onboarding and applications, and provide more personalized responses based on account contacts or customer history. Now that can reduce friction while still keeping the experience conversational. In fraud detection and prevention, voice becomes part of the security stack. That can mean real-time fraud alerts, behavioral biometrics, secure transaction verification, and detecting patterns that may indicate suspicious behavior. As synthetic media and spoofing techniques continue to evolve, that trust layer becomes even more important. In wealth management and investment services, voice AI can support both the client experience and advisor productivity. It can help with proactive updates, personalized information delivery, and more responsive service. And in insurance, it can streamline the claims, automate support, and improve lead qualification and guided assistance. Now, across all these examples, the opportunity is not just to automate a phone call, it is to create a better interaction, one that is faster, more helpful, and better aligned to what the customer actually needs in the moment. That is the really bigger theme here. The value is not in having an AI voice for its own sake. The value is in improving experience, increasing efficiency, and strengthening trust. So if those are the business drivers and use cases, what technology actually makes this possible? So Amazon Novasonic is a great example of speech-to-speech foundation model for conversational AI. What stands out here is that it's built for real-time voice interaction with natural turn-taking, strong speech recognition, adaptive speech responses, expressive voices, multilingual capability, and low latency. That matters because voice experiences succeed or fail on those details. If the latency is too high, if the turn-taking feels awkward, if the interruptions are not handled well, or if the system cannot adapt to real speech patterns, trust drops very quickly. So what is promising about models like this is that they are built for spoken interaction from the start, not just text interaction with a voice layer added afterwards. In finance, that matters because many conversations are sensitive and high trust. The bar is much higher than simply answering a basic question. So when we talk about AI-powered voice, we are really talking about a much more natural real-time conversational experience. One that feels closer to speaking with a capable assistant rather than navigating a rigid system. Now, the final piece is how you operationalize all of this in the real world. So because a great voice experience is not just about the model, it's also about the communication infrastructure and orchestration around it. So this slide shows how Vonage Voice API and Amazon Novasonic come together. On the access side, you can support global PSTN calls, STIP connections, contact centers, web experiences over WebRTC, as well as mobile app experiences over WebRTC. So enterprises can meet customers on the channels they already use. And I think one of the most important ideas on this slide is that Vonage is not just acting as a simple connector. There's a real enterprise value in the communication layer itself. Call routing, scaling, advanced error handling, multi-channel communications, and helping ensure the audio stream is clean and reliable for the AI platform. Those practical pieces matter a lot because they are often the difference between a demo and something enterprise ready. Then above that, you have the intelligence layer. Novasonic combined with prompts, user context, RAG knowledge bases, and tools or function calling. Now this gives the voice agent access to information and actions so it can do more than just speak fluently. It can actually help solve the business problem. So if you think about the full flow, a user calls in or the business initiates an outbound call, Vonage handles the communication side, the session handling, the transport, the integration layer, and Novasonic powers the conversational intelligence. Then prompts, enterprise tools, and knowledge sources shape the actual outcome. And that is really where this gets exciting for financial services, because the opportunity is not just to automate an interaction. It is also to create secure, scalable, context-aware voice experiences that can improve service, strengthen trust, and deliver better business outcomes. All right, y'all ready for a demo? Did I leave my, there we go.
Smartphone connected.
All right, so in this demo, I got a notification. In this demo, I got a notification from my bank that there's some possible fraud activity going on. So I'm going to call my bank from my mobile banking app, Trusted Bank. And besides talking to an AI agent, I'll need to authenticate, of course. So we're also using other Vonage APIs to authenticate. And you'll see that on the screen. Actually, let me switch the screen so you can see the interaction. Oops. All right, so let's go ahead and make this call.
Thanks for calling Trusted Bank Company, Oscar. How can I help you today?
Hi, I was wondering if you could tell me what time your branch opens. What are your business hours?
I can provide general information about our bank. Our business hours are usually from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., Monday through Friday. However, for the most accurate and up-to-date information, I recommend checking our official website or giving us a call directly. Is there anything else I can assist you with?
¿Podríamos hablar en español, por favor?
Claro, Oscar. Podemos hablar en español. ¿En qué puedo ayudarte hoy? Si deseas información sobre tu cuenta, como el saldo, transacciones recientes o transferencias, necesito verificar tu identidad primero.
Actually, let's switch back over to English. There's only a few people that probably know Spanish here. All right. Yeah, can you tell me about my account balance, please?
Our Frisco branch usually closes at 5 p.m., Monday through Friday.
So you're really embarrassing me here in my demo. I'm calling about my account balance. Can you tell me that?
To access your account balance, I need to verify your identity first. Let me verify your identity. I will now check the results of the authentication methods.
Okay, and?
Unfortunately, I'm unable to access your account at this time. You will be transferred to a live agent who can assist you with this matter.
Thanks. You really embarrassed me today. All right, let me try that again. I had a recorded demo, and sometimes you have to take a risk.
I understand. You're referencing a demo, Oscar. For security reasons, I need to verify your identity before discussing any account details.
Yeah, can
or
I get my
transactions.
account balance, please?
Let me verify your identity before I can share that information. I'll need to run our security check. Let me verify your identity. I'll be using 3 security methods: SIM swap verification, silent authentication, and device location check. Now I'll process these checks. I'm sorry, Oscar, but I can't verify your identity at this time due to our security protocols. This means I can't share your account balance or any other account information. You'll need to speak with a live agent who can
All right,
verify your
never mind. All right. Demo failed me today. Let me try that one more time. I'm going to exit the app and go back into it.
I'm sorry, you're working better than most of the calls I get.
Thanks for calling Trusted Bank Company, Oscar. How can I help you today?
Yes, I'd like to get my account balance.
Let me verify your identity. I will now check the following security checks: silent authentication and device location. Thanks.
Yeah, my account balance, please. Come on, you're almost there. All right. Well, we'll move on from that. If somebody wants to see the demo afterwards. Yeah. Okay. Let me just go to the presentation.
We've all experienced this before.
Yeah. It's always embarrassing though.
It's also dynamic, it's watch dynamic still watching.
Oops. You should remember it. All of them fail.
All right, so before we move on to what's next, here's the takeaway I want you to leave with. Voice is not being replaced by AI, obviously. It is being redefined by AI. And in many verticals like financial services, that opens the door to more trusted, more intelligent, and more valuable customer interactions at scale. So just a quick plug. I do have my colleague, Dwayne Hemmings. He'll be hosting a breakout session at 2:45, where if you want to get into playing with our voice APIs, he'll guide you through that. And then feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, scan the QR code, or just talk to me in the hallway. All right, thank you.
And we've all been there with demos. We're taking a 10-minute break. And we'll be back, we'll be starting, like, I don't know what time it is, but 10 minutes from now, we'll be starting again. Please feel free to stretch your legs, say hello to someone at the table, walk across the room.